Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hi, Geoff. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Andrea. Are you okay?
Very good, very good. How are you?
Very happy to be here with you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as you know, I'm really happy about this conversation because I met you for the first time a few years ago now when I was still working at Bosch, and I attended some of your, not just one, but some of your training courses on various subjects.
I'm fairly sure you were one of the people that kept turning up going, oh, not you again.
No, I actually enjoyed each one of them very much. They've always been very useful and interesting and insightful. And I'm sure that this conversation will be as insightful as your training courses. So thank you again.
I hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me.
And thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And today with you, Geoff, I want to talk about assertiveness. I know that you can cover many subjects when it comes to effective communication. I would like to focus our chat on assertiveness.
Sure.
So let's start by just what are we talking about? What is assertiveness?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question to start with, isn't it? Even more so because I discovered by pure accident that not every country in the world even can translate the word assertiveness. So if you don't have a word for the concept, I wonder if you have the concept itself. And that's an interesting one. Many people, the best way of describing assertiveness is by contrasting it with aggression and with submission. It's almost the easiest way of doing it. It's the middle path. So with aggression, if somebody is aggressive with you, the intention is nearly always a sort of win-lose. That I'm right, you're wrong. That I'm correct, you're not correct. That I have the power that you don't. With submissive behaviors, it's the other way around. It's more, I lose, you win. I don't want to upset you. I don't want to disappoint you. I don't feel that I can put my needs or my views forward. With assertiveness, it's much more, it's closer to the win-win. It's that I value you as a human being. We may not agree on everything, but that doesn't mean that I show you disrespect or that I don't want to listen to you or hear your views. But just as much, I believe I have just as much right to my views, my opinions, my thoughts. They're no more valuable, they're no less valuable than yours. And I think we will both benefit by sharing those. And that's the assertive approach.
Got it. And Geoff, why do you think this is so? I believe that you think that this is important, that it's important to understand for people, for professionals, how to be more assertive at work, in life, in order to achieve what you want to achieve, in order to have good relationships, again, in life and at work. Why should we care about it? Why do you think
again, that's a terrific question, my friend. Why should we bother about this middle path? I challenge anybody watching or listening to our discussion to go back through their own history and think about times in which they've behaved submissively, in times in which somebody has said something to them or behaved in such a way, and they thought, oh no, I can't say anything, I can't respond because I risk angering or upsetting the other person. So do you know what? I'll just keep quiet. What I challenge them is, how did you feel after that? When you went back home, or later on as you're lying in bed and your brain is going over that, and you're thinking, I should have said this. I wish I'd done that. I now feel aggrieved, or I feel betrayed, or I feel put upon, taken advantage of. Try the other side. Think about those times when you've been aggressive. I'm a big guy. I'm quite strong. I can speak, as you can clearly tell. And it's not, and I have done this in the past, I'm ashamed to say, where I have just bulldozed somebody else. I've done it because I've got the physical stature, because I'm able to do it verbally as well. And how do you feel when you've won that battle? And in truth, I wonder whether many of you don't share my experience, where at the end of it, you feel guilty, you feel ashamed of yourself, you think that, well, yes, I might have won the battle, but I may have lost a friend. I may have lost a colleague. I may have destroyed a relationship. Surely there was a better way.
Yeah, and that's why this is so important. And also, Geoff, what can you help us to understand what is it that makes some people assertive and what is it that makes other people not assertive?
Again, it comes from so many different places, Andrea. You can get to the scenario where, and I've had this in some of my coaching courses in the past, where I had a woman, she was older than I was, extremely talented, worked as a PA to a managing director, and wanted to go into a different career. She wanted to go further. Now, intellectually, she was perfectly capable of doing this. In terms of her personality, absolutely no problem, except for one thing. Her father had told her since she was a little girl, you should know your place. You should know your place. You know, don't think you're better than you are. And that phrase kept coming through. And as a result, the biggest thing holding her back was herself, that she believed that others were better than she was, that she believed that others somehow were superior in some way. And as a result, it had a major impact on her career. Others, if you look at the aggressive side, may well have found that right from being young children or at school, they may have had to fight quite hard to be valued. Maybe they were one of a large family where elder siblings were perpetually bullying them, and if they wanted anything, they had to learn to fight for themselves. They may have had parents who were quite aggressive. They may have found that at school, if they didn't end up being the person with the fists, then they would have been the person on the other end of those fists. So it can come from a variety of different places, I think.
And so what I understand is that it comes from the environment in terms of the family you've grown up with and what you've experienced maybe as a child. So it's I think in English you say nature versus nurture, right?
In this case, please believe me when I say I don't always believe this about everything, but I do tend to believe it when it comes to assertiveness. I was taught I was a very shy kid, and going to school was a complete shock. I'd never been to a creche. I'd never been to a nursery. I spent my time with my mother and my younger brother and my grandparents. And one day, my mother takes me to this place and just leaves me. And I think I cried for the whole of the first day. And I found myself in a scenario where I was very submissive for the whole time. It was just a nightmare for me. But that came from my background. My father hadn't realized this, and my father was somebody who taught me something that I believe is brilliant for assertiveness. And he's always said this to me. He's always said, nobody's better than you. That doesn't mean you're better than them, and I want to be clear with that. He said, but nobody's better than you. They may be richer, they may have another experience, they may have a better education than you. It doesn't make them better, it just makes them different. And that one sentence has stayed with me for my life, and it helped me to overcome that shyness and that sensitivity as a child. And today I do work with people who are very young, who are just starting their career. I work with people who earn very, very little, who really would be in that percentage of the population who are on 0 hours contracts, etc. But I also work with members of royalty. I do work with people who are high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals, billionaires, multi-billionaires. And that phrase from my father, they're different, but one is not better than the other.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's just one sentence. And I don't know now I'm not a father yet, but you start thinking about it, and I don't know whether your father, when he said that sentence to you, whether for him it was such an important sentence. I don't know whether he was aware of the impact that single sentence had on you, the positive impact that he had on you. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Well, again, I'm very lucky in the fact that I've been able to observe him and his model. Both my father and my mother were both the youngest of 7 children. And both of their fathers had died at a young age. Their mothers had to bring up 7 children at a time where there was no great social benefit system around. And it was they came from quite a poverty-stricken background. My father today is the deputy lieutenant of his county, which in other words means he is the Queen's representative in his area. In all official functions, he represents the Queen. And he's done it with little or no help from anybody financially contributing. He's done it through hard work and an abject belief that you can achieve this yourself, but it is very much up to you to go and do it. I mean, that informs a lot of my politics, and it informs my approach to assertiveness, I think.
And yeah, connecting this to assertiveness, how can you achieve that yourself, as you just said? How can you, if you're not naturally, if I can say this, if you're not naturally assertive, how can you become more assertive?
Like many things that we teach, and you know this as well as I do, like many things that we teach, it has to start with you wanting to. And where that starts is, at what stage are you going to get fed up with the fact that everybody around you is taking advantage of you, mistreating you, that your boss just expects you to work extra hours, that your partner expects you to do all the housework, that your children expect you to clean up after them? At some stage, you're going to get angry with this. At some stage, you're going to go, this is not fair. And at that stage, we can start looking at teaching the techniques of assertiveness, but it must start with, I want to. Now, I've come across the many people in my life who don't want to, because it requires a certain courage. It requires a certain desire. But it's also the same on the other side. If you are one of those people who believes I can just shout at people, I can scream at the world, I can bully, I can manipulate, I can fight, and phrases like, it's the squeaky wheel that gets oiled, nice guys finish last, you'll get nowhere unless you fight for it. If you genuinely believe that that's the best way, you won't care about assertiveness. Why would you? But my own experience has taught me that that's very tiring. To keep fighting all the time is incredibly tiring. And as many dictators around the world have discovered, if you are going to run your country according to fear and terror, you can't stop. Because the moment you stop, the people that you have terrorized and bullied and done terrible things to are going to come for you next. Now, on a much smaller scale, I think that works with aggression too. If you're going to be aggressive all the time, it's very difficult to stop, because all the people that you've squashed and destroyed along the way are now looking for that time where they can turn the tables on you. So I think that's the biggest argument against aggression. It's not that it doesn't work in the short time. I think it can. In the short time, it can work. But I think in the long term, it becomes extremely tiring. And I think most of us would prefer a different way. So provided we've got both of those things, the person who's fed up with being taken advantage of, or the person who's just tired of fighting all the time, then we can start looking at the assertiveness.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also connected to something that you've just said, and also something that you said at the very beginning of our conversation, I think there is this belief that when we talk about being assertive, I think some people think that actually what we are talking about is also being pushy. They ask, okay, does this mean that I need to be pushy? I think there is, would you agree, Geoff, that there is this misbelief that maybe assertiveness is a little bit like being pushy? What do you think about it?
I would agree. I've been told many times over the years that win-win doesn't work. And I will normally challenge you, say, why doesn't win-win work? And then the person will say something along the lines of, because I always lose. That's not really win-win then, is it? That ended up being win-lose. So win-win does work, but the idea about it being pushy ignores that whilst I'm standing up for myself, So a submissive person suddenly can see, well, I'm standing up for myself. Won't the other person see me? They're missing the other side of that equation. When I'm being assertive with somebody else, I absolutely must also listen to the other person and value their contributions and look for a win-win solution here, which doesn't just satisfy me, it always also satisfies them. If I go from being submissive to seemingly assertive without considering the other person, then I've moved from submission to aggression in one leap.
And that's not what we want to achieve here. And because you mentioned some techniques before, you said that there are some techniques. I remember because I attended your training workshop on assertiveness, and I remember one technique in particular, which was this difference between I statements and you statements. Yeah. Could you tell us more about it? And it would be great if you could give us some examples, if you've got something in mind.
If you had to take one thing away from the assertiveness course, that's the thing I think everybody should take away from the course, which is just a pronoun, I and you, and the power of it. We're becoming much more aware now of the power of pronouns for all kinds of reasons, but in assertiveness techniques, it is just I and you. Look at the difference between saying to somebody, you're being stupid, and saying, I'm not comfortable with that idea. Just something like that, something as simple as that. If you say, somebody proposes, we're going to go to the cinema tomorrow, you're being stupid, and I'm not comfortable with that idea. You're being stupid. I always think of you as verbal finger pointing. Yeah, the moment you do that, you're crazy, you're stupid, you're trying to cheat me, you're not being fair, and it's an attack, it's an accusation. And when the person says, shall we go to the cinema, you're being stupid, the other person has now worked on this as an attack in themselves. It's not just an attack on the idea, it's an attack on themselves. And it's very difficult to respond in any way other than to get upset by that. I can't believe you've hurt me in that way, or to decide to go on the attack. Well, your idea is equally stupid. Let's fight this out. That's probably not going to go very far for us. But look at what happens if you say, I'm not comfortable with that idea. I'm not comfortable with going to the cinema. I'm not attacking you. I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about my thoughts, my feelings, my views. I believe I'm entitled to have those thoughts, those views, and those feelings. And if I were talking to my partner or I were talking to a friend, then I would expect that friend or that partner, because of the emotion and the love that we have together, instead of to get defensive, to say, well, why aren't you comfortable? And then we can have a much more productive discussion. And it's very topical, I know right now, but I might say, well, I'm not comfortable breaking social distancing, or I'm not comfortable wearing a mask, wearing glasses for the whole thing. Oh, I didn't realize it because my friend doesn't wear glasses. Oh, I'm sorry, Geoff, I didn't understand that would be a problem, wearing mask and glasses. How about if we go for a walk instead? Oh, I like that idea much more. And we haven't now had a fight. What we've got is a much more productive result. That's
again, that's, sorry to cut you off. That's really fascinating, because all you're doing is you are changing maybe just one word, or you just choose your words a bit more carefully, and everything changes in your ability to communicate your ideas effectively, your ability to have more productive and meaningful conversation, just by choosing your words more carefully. Isn't that true?
Look at what happened just then. Isn't that true? And my answer will be, I believe it is. Look what happens if I say, yes, that's true. Because all of a sudden, we've now both established a fact, whereas in fact, it's not a fact at all. It's an opinion of both of us. It's a belief of both of us. It's a thought for both of us. And we're perfectly entitled to have those thoughts and discuss them between ourselves. But I'm sure there are other listeners who will go, well, that's not true. Instead of, I'm not sure I share the view that you two have. Well, okay, well, let's have the discussion. I think we're in danger as a society of starting to state opinions as though they were facts.
Mm.
And that can also create enormous conflict, and that can create a lot of aggression. An aggressive person will do that. You're being unfair, fact. You're being unreasonable, fact. You're trying to trick me, fact. As opposed to, I feel like you're trying to trick me. I feel betrayed. I feel that this is unfair.
Again, it's so powerful. Again, just because of one word, then if you say something like that, I feel, whatever it is that you feel, then there is nothing the other person can say to you against it, because that's how I feel about it. Yeah, very powerful.
And they're more likely to say, "Oh, I don't want you to feel like that.
Yeah.
What can we do to change that feeling?" And inevitably, what ends up happening is we work together. That's what we would expect in a working environment. And I've said this to clients, and I've said it to my boss. So I'm not. This is not something I would say. Oh, you can't possibly say that to your boss. Yes, I have. I have discussed this with my boss, and some time ago, my boss said to me, he said, "Look, I want you to come with me to make a presentation." He said, "I'll do the first 20 minutes, you do the second 20 minutes, and then the third 20 minutes we'll hand over for questions." I was very happy to do that. We turned up, and my boss, who was a wonderful man, I mean, sadly he's no longer with us, but I adored him, and he did his presentation, and he went on for 35 minutes. Hey, who hasn't been in that position with their boss?
Tell me about it.
Now, I was perfectly okay with this because, my brain was calculating for every minute that he went over. I was calculating, okay, I've now got 25 minutes left. If I can do my presentation, cut it down from 20 minutes to 15 minutes, that'll still leave us 10 minutes for questions. That's fine, he's my boss. So at the end of the 35 minutes, he said, "Geoff, over to you." And I started to speak, and I think I'd only been speaking for about 30 seconds when my boss said, "Can I just interrupt for a second there?" And then he spoke for another 15 minutes. We now have 15 minutes left or so. And at the end of it, he said, "Geoff, do you want to go on?" I went, no, I think we'd probably just go straight on to questions now. And the meeting went fine, but afterwards he could tell I was not happy about this. I don't hide my body language very well. And as we went out, he said, "What's the problem?" I said, "Look, I was very happy to come and do 20 minutes as you'd asked me to do. I would have also been very happy for you to have done the entire session and for me just to have worked with you for the question and answers. I would have equally been happy to have stayed in the office and worked on another project for you to do the entire thing." I said, "However, I feel extremely unhappy that I prepared a 20-minute presentation and didn't get a chance to do it at all." I said, that doesn't work for me.
And how did he react to that?
He looked at me and he said, "Sorry."
So it worked.
Because notice, at no stage have I attacked him.
True.
At no stage have I criticized him. At no stage have I said he was wrong to do any of those things. The power of the I statement is I've talked about myself. And if you analyzed practically every part of that, which part would you disagree with?
True.
Which part would you think that I was being unreasonable about? I've said I'm happy to stay at home. I'm happy to come and sit there. The only thing I'm not happy about is I'm not happy to prepare a presentation and then not get a chance to do that. Well, who would have been happy with that?
Of course.
Now, my boss was a very reasonable guy, and he just got carried away. Occasionally, he forgot where he was or didn't always pay attention. And you know what? Now I'm in his position. I can see how easy that is.
Yeah.
He was apologetic. It never happened again. And we were still very, very close until, as I say, he died.
Fantastic. And Geoff, also, what do you think? Sometimes, again, if we think about assertiveness, I think we also need to cover a little bit this idea of confidence and self-confidence. I don't know what you think about, but do you think that in some ways the two things are connected? And if so, do you have any, if not, no problem at all, but if so, do you have any suggestions for how we can build and boost our self-confidence, especially when it comes to, again, our willingness and our ability to speak up and to communicate effectively?
The tricky part with this one is it goes back to what I said earlier about belief.
Mm.
And I'm taking it from the submissive person rather than the aggressive person. And the submissive person may need to have a look at their own beliefs. And the beliefs in terms of, and I have what I call a personal rights schedule. And it's always quite a controversial thing to introduce on the course, because at the top of it, it says, I have the right to put myself first.
Mm.
Now, somebody who is a parent who has children will often find that very difficult to swallow when they've spent their entire life since their children were born thinking, I have no right to put myself first anymore. Now I must put my family, my children, my partner before myself. Now, despite the fact that as a father, I completely agree with that, I don't agree with it every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are times where children can be selfish. There are times where your partner can be selfish. And there are times where they may not be behaving particularly well towards you. And at that stage, you know, it's a win-win, remember. It's not just all one way or the other. The parent who perpetually cleans up after their child, the parent who perpetually gives their child any money that they want, the parent who perpetually is doing everything for the child, A, may be damaging that child by not helping them to become independent themselves, but B, has suddenly decided that their life no longer matters. And I've seen this in more than a few families, where eventually one person in that family almost suffers from a depression. They get down to the stage of they believe they're almost the family drudge, as it were, like Cinderella in the story. They are there just to cook and clean. And this lovely parent no longer smiles, no longer laughs, no longer seems to have any fun, tends to be irritable with people in the family. And the reason, it's not actually anybody else's fault. It's that this person has put themselves so far down the list of priorities that they are no longer living their own life and therefore contributing valuably to the rest of the family. My mother, I've teased her over this for many years. My mother has done that in the past, where I didn't want to upset anybody and then has ended up being upset herself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we have a right to put ourselves first. We have a right to think about our own feelings. We have a right not to consider the feelings of others. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to exercise that right very often, but sometimes we can. Sometimes the fact that other people want to do something and I don't is okay. You know, why don't you want to go to that party? I just don't, is enough of an answer. Because I found this again since I was a teenager. Somebody will say, let's go out to this club this evening. I don't want to go to that club. Why?
True.
Why are you asking me that question? Because if I give you an answer, I'm going to be washing my hair.
Well, we are in the same boat here.
Yeah. They will then go, can't you wash your hair another evening? And it doesn't matter what reason I come up with. They will try and overcome every reason I come up with. And the conclusion inevitably will eventually I'll give up and I will go to a club that I don't want to go to, have a miserable evening. Why? Yeah. So the personal right, to answer your question, what is it you need to do if you're shy or you're lacking in confidence? You really need to change your beliefs. And your beliefs have to be win-win. And remember, win-win means my views matter. My values matter. What I want matters, and I don't have to justify it to everybody all the time.
Yeah. And Geoff, I also remember, because now you talked about maybe the idea of winning or losing arguments with your friends. They want to go to the club, you don't want to go to the club. So we're talking about winning arguments now. And I remember another technique that you taught us in your training course, which was the use of good open questions to win arguments. Again, could you please tell us more about it? Again, it would be great if you could give us some examples.
There's a terrible expression. I apologize. These days it's probably not the greatest expression, but it give somebody enough rope and they will hang themselves. It's not a nice expression, but you get the idea. It's to give the other person enough room to explain themselves. I think it's probably a better way of looking at it in terms of who's doing all the work. Where does all the pressure come from? So let's imagine you've done something or you've said something that upset me. And my response is to you, did you say that to upset me? That's a closed-ended question, did. Closed-ended questions could normally be answered with just a yes or no. So do you, have you, could you, will you, are you, etc. And if I say, did you say that to upset me? You go, no. Well, did you do it because you wanted to prove to everybody you're better than me?
No.
Say, no. You could even go on the defensive and say, how could you think, Geoff, I would want to do that to you? What kind of person do you think I am? And suddenly I'm now on the defensive. If I turn it round just a little bit, you've said something that upset me, and I say to you, using an I statement, I feel really upset that you said that. Why did you say that? Now look where the pressure's gone. Now look who has to do the work, and give the person enough rope, they will hang themselves. Now you have to explain and find a good reason why you said what you said that was not to upset me. It takes the pressure off me. It puts a little bit more pressure on you. And it will also make you think about the impact and the effect of the words and the phrases that you've used towards me without attacking you.
Yeah, I can see how powerful this is. And I think I need to get better using these techniques also at home here with my wife. I can see already how powerful it can be. The difficulty, Geoff, is like personally, is that sometimes you know certain techniques, but then going from theory to practice is a different skill set, isn't it?
Yeah, it's practice. It's practice. I mentioned to you as a child, I was very, very shy. I don't think I really started becoming confident until I went to university. I don't think I was ever that confident at school. But once I started to learn the stuff in order to teach it, by the way, so, that's how I learned it. Somebody asked me for a course on assertiveness, so I went away and learned about assertiveness. And as I learned it, I started to realize how often I got it wrong, just as you've described. And I think in my early training career, I wish I'd known about assertiveness earlier, because I think I would have had fewer fights, fewer arguments. And there are times, Andre, when I have deliberately broken these rules, deliberately, just to see what would happen. It was almost like a bit of research for me, where I found myself in a major conflict scenario. Fortunately, something to do with my hobby, not to do with my professional life. And I thought, just out of curiosity, what will happen if I decide to abandon assertiveness and just go for a full-on aggressive response? That was 5 years ago, and I'm still living with the consequences of that aggressive response. And if nothing else, it taught me assertiveness is a lot less painful.
Yeah, that's why it's good not to stay away from the techniques that you've learned from an assertiveness perspective. Yeah,
just to see if they still work. Now, I'm conscious now. Without again, I hope none of your friends get upset. And I'll try and stay as neutral as I can on this one. But when I look at many major political figures at the moment, it would be easy to say they're not behaving assertively. It would be easy to conclude that some of them are behaving aggressively at the moment. Donald Trump is an obvious example people would cite. When I describe assertiveness, these days people often say, well, Trump's not assertiveness, and he's the president of the United States. So doesn't that belie your argument? Be aggressive, be like Trump, and you could become the president of the United States. Now that's valid. I can't dismiss that, and I'm not going to dismiss it. I'm watching Trump very carefully. Personally, I don't think there's any way on this planet I would want to be like Donald Trump. There are very few of his behaviors I would wish to mirror myself. But I can't ignore the fact that he is the president of the United States. I feel this is not going to end well. I feel it's not. But I've promised myself, if I look at Donald Trump and he ends his 1 or 2 terms successfully, I may well start a new course, Negotiate Like Trump.
So if you do, then let me know, and I will be curious. Yeah.
I think it's really important that we keep our brains, our minds open to ideas. Assertiveness is a tool, but no tool works in every circumstance, in everything. There are times, forgive me, my friend, but there are times where with your partner, with your wife, you may not want to be assertive. There are times with your children, you may choose to be submissive, and there are other times you choose to be aggressive. For example, with a child who is about to put a pencil in an electric socket, you're much more likely to use an aggressive response, which is, get away from there now! Because if I want to, as they're doing it, say, let me please explain to you the process of electricity and the damage that it could do, and I feel like... The child is now fried on the carpet. Yeah. So aggression is sometimes the right response. Submissiveness sometimes is. As your children, how old are your children?
I don't have any.
Wise man. My children have just gone through the teenage stage. And many parents who've had their children go through the teenage phase have found that their children are rude to them, will snap at them, will get angry with them, may shout at them. They would not accept that behavior from anybody else. But I've noticed many parents, and I include myself, will sometimes allow that to go unchallenged and will allow it to go unpunished. And it's not because we're genuinely being weak. It's because we recognize this is a very, very difficult time, especially with COVID. It's a very difficult time for teenagers, and therefore we're allowing them a certain leeway because they're under so much pressure outside the house. They need to explode with somebody, and the only person they can explode with is that person that they love. So sometimes as a parent, you go, okay, I can take this. I can take the punches just to help you right now.
Yeah, and I think that the key you mentioned before, the word choice, I choose to behave in a certain way. So I know of course, I know what it means to be assertive in that particular situation, but I choose to behave differently. And you've got your own reasons why you want to do that. So choice is the key, isn't it?
Absolutely. And there are times where even if you've made that choice, your children or your partner may go too far. It may go to a point that you go, oh, well, I was prepared to accept it, but you've actually stepped over a line, whatever that line is. And now I need to explain to you that I am choosing to do this. It's not because I'm weak and can't fight back.
Yeah. Geoff, thank you very much. Before we close, do you have, if you think about assertiveness and also if you want effective communication in general, do you have any book recommendations or people to follow, any resources that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I mean, in terms of assertiveness, I learned a lot of it from the negotiation book, Getting to Yes, by Fisher, Ury, and Patton. I still think it's an amazing book, and I'm fascinated by how often other negotiation skills, courses, books, literature keeps coming back to that. Even with the Brexit negotiations, Michel Barnier quoted from that book a lot of times, despite the fact it was written way back in the 70s. Sometimes you just get it, and they got it extremely well. There are other old favorites. The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey is still an extremely solid
Classic.
book. It's a really good one. They stand the test of time.
Yeah.
How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Dale
These are almost like your baseline books. Our biggest challenge, I feel, is starting to be that assertiveness in some circumstances is being overridden. And it's being overridden. I believe everybody is entitled to their thoughts, their views, and their feelings. We're not entitled to impose them on somebody else, and we're not entitled to try and indicate that our views are more powerful than somebody else's. I think the way you learn is by listening to people who have different views to you. If you think your way of thinking is right, expose it to somebody who doesn't think that way. Let them give you the counter arguments. And at that stage, you may well either change your own views, find some way of modifying them, or at least find arguments to defend them. But I think it's really dangerous not to listen to somebody else's views. And that, I find a lot of the reading I'm doing at the moment is about things on like the cancel culture, that we're no longer prepared to even listen or entertain the opposite side's view. Most of my friends have different political views to me, and in some cases, quite far apart. But it doesn't mean we're not friends, and it does mean I learn an awful lot about how to see a different scenario, and I value that difference. And it does, I am afraid that we probably are losing that a little bit. So a lot of my reading at the moment, many of your viewers wouldn't want to read, but I am interested in nevertheless.
Oh, that's great. And I think that's a great place with this thought to end this conversation, Geoff. Thank you so much again for your time, for your insights. Before we close, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Is there a topic or a question that you would have liked me to ask you, but I didn't do it? Do you have a final message for our listeners? Anything else you'd like to share with us?
I think we're at a dangerous stage in our environment at the moment. I think social media is both an amazing thing and a dangerous thing. And I would be interested at some stage with some of your other speakers, perhaps, to have a discussion on this one in terms of how do we ensure that truth, how do we ensure that facts, how do we ensure that we can have debate, discussion in a free way, which we have fought for hundreds of years to do, and not allow misguided attempts to squash that.
Yeah. And Geoff, this is very much, yesterday night, I watched a documentary on Netflix, The Social Dilemma. I don't know whether you've watched it.
I haven't seen it, no.
It's very much connected to this concern that you've just brought up. So I highly recommend it to you and to our listeners. I don't want to get into the detail.
No.
The social dilemma, very much connected to what you've just expressed now.
There's one last phrase, and I have this on my business card. I have an ear on my business card. Underneath it says, listen. It's an old trite phrase, and I absolutely accept that it's old and it's trite. But it says we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them in that proportion. And do you know what? Maybe we need to be reminded of that a little bit.
That's true. There is a reason for that. Geoff, thank you very much again. I've learned a lot. I'm sure that this has been very insightful and useful for our listeners as well. I appreciated your time, and let's keep in touch.
Well, I hope you invite me back.
I will do, certainly. All the best, Geoff. Cheers.
Cheers, my friend. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.